Hey guys, it's Alan, aka GameLark, with a new episode of Devil May Play.
Hey guys, Trip here, and not to sound cliche, but I have a dream.
Tell us your dream.
N- Now, a very long time ago, when I was just a little baby Trip, I had a dream about a video game. Now, my ideal video game as a young child was a bit out of the box, something that would probably never be possible, maybe at the rate technology is going, but at least definitely not when I was a kid. But the game I always wanted to play was a game where you were just thrown into a world, a game about exploration, a game where you could just keep going and going and going, always finding something new, always meeting somebody new, always discovering some new monster or civilization or culture or something to look at. And no matter how far you went, there'd always be something new and interesting to see and experience.
Hmm.
And as I got older, I started to realize that while that dream hasn't really been realized, there are some things that can scratch that itch for me. Those being sandbox RPGs, specifically sandbox RPGs with a heavy focus on emergent and dynamic content. Now, if you've watched my channel for a while, you'd know I talk about that a lot. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you'd know that Lark and I bitch about that a lot because, and you may think that we don't like those sorts of things, like the way we talk about Ubisoft, the way we talk about Elder Scrolls games. You may think that those aren't our types of games, but speaking for myself, the reason why why I am so harsh on these things is because that is the exact kind of game I have always wanted. So today, I want to talk about our ideal sandbox experiences. What developers do wrong, what they do right, and what we would do to make a game that we could play forever.
Like a soul game. Like instead of a soulmate, it's like a soul game.
We're trying to find our soul game. Yes, Lark, that's a great way of putting it. So, so we talk a lot about open world games, and we talk about, the good, The Witcher, the bad, Assassin's Creed games, a lot of them. And we try to figure out, well, what makes one of them compelling while the other isn't, when in a lot of ways they're doing some similar things. We talked in the last episode about radiant quests in the Elder Scrolls and how oftentimes they just end up being incredibly repetitive. They don't feel compelling at all, and they just keep throwing them on you until you're sick of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it got me thinking about what makes compelling dynamic gameplay, what makes compelling emergent gameplay. And what it really got me thinking of was something I haven't talked about in quite a while because it's still a fresh wound. It got me thinking about EverQuest Next.
Okay.
Now, Lark, I'm sure you remember my long tirades on that game.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, the thing that really got me so into that game, and I've said this a million times before, was the way they were doing dynamic content. I felt like the way they described it was finally solving the problems with that sort of repetition we see in a lot of other games that try to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, there's always the same example that pop up, like the orcs on the road. So there's just all sorts of different factions and monsters just doing their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's not that many linear quests, but these quests are setting themselves up in the world dynamically. So, for example, if there's some orcs on the road, orcs like gold, but they hate civilization. So they're going to naturally go to places like some roads where a lot of merchants go down. So if those orcs are there and they start killing merchants, eventually a dynamic quest will pop up saying, hey, these orcs are on the road, go kill them. Now, first off, that's something that actually makes sense. It's something that actually happened in the world and something that can actually impact the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that right off the bat is solving a lot of the issues I feel like people are having with a lot of these just filler quests we were talking about in the last episode that don't really tie into anything, that aren't really compelling, that are just there for the sake of being there. They're not
Right.
real variety. They're not compelling.
It doesn't fit within the context of the game, essentially, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Feels like disconnected.
Right. And it goes even further than that with the way EverQuest Next was planning on doing it. Because, if those orcs stayed on that road for long enough, they'd start building up a little encampment around it. If players didn't do anything about it, that encampment would become a little orc town. If players didn't do anything about it, it would eventually become basically an outdoor dungeon or raid where things are getting more and more dangerous and more powerful and disrupting the game world more and more and more. And so you need to bring a bunch of players in to solve it. And the reason why I love that idea so much is because you've literally created a game that never ends. You've created a game where, yeah, the core mechanics will always be the same. You're traveling around, exploring, finding some new things, and fighting things. That's how a lot of games work. But the thing that sets this apart is that there will always be some new tangible motivation. There's always going to be some new tangible story element behind it. You're not just following a linear set of quests like a lot of games go, and you're not just doing a random Radiant quest that always feels the same and doesn't connect to anything like in, an Elder Scrolls game. You found this perfect balance where you literally stop being a game player and you finally become that thing that we've always wanted to be in a video game, an adventurer.
I think if I can jump in real quick to just kind of label what you're talking about, it seems to be like you're talking about player impact. Like the fact that your choices have a discernible impact on the world. And to quote an example, when I was playing through Fable 2, right, there's a few times when you make a decision to, I think there was like a town you could decide to renovate or let just be shitty. And if you renovate it, like it was totally reinvented and it was awesome. But the problem with that game is it just didn't happen enough. It happened a few times, but if it was a longer game or if
set when it happened.
So what you're talking about to me is player impact. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, definitely. So the best part about this system, though, this Storybricks, which was the name of it, it was the name of the company that designed this, is that they already had this crap working. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. Now, a long time ago, back before the EverQuest Next subreddit shut down, we actually had a conversation with one of the Storybricks guys who I think it was on the EverQuest Next subreddit. It was somewhere. But he was talking about how this was already working. Now, it wasn't entirely contingent on EverQuest Next. I mean, that totally went bust, and Storybricks ended up dissolving under some things, but the technology was there. So that's what kind of makes it more infuriating for me, because I know this stuff is possible. And the way they break it down, it's very simple when you really get down to it. It's a very simple system. It's just a bunch of different factions with likes and dislikes going around the world and naturally interacting with the world. And that creates the things you do in the game. It's a very simple concept, but it creates this system that is completely innovative and like nothing I've really seen
like a dynamic
game on that scale. Yes, true dynamic content, because I really believe that true dynamic content is the next milestone for video games. It will take video games from just linear experiences, which are fine. I love games like Dishonored. I love games like I was playing Oddworld today. I love every game in that series, but those are very linear experiences. But it brings us closer to what I've been trying to find for years. A game where I can lose myself in another world and truly feel like I'm an adventurer or a bounty hunter or a soldier going through the countryside, solving problems, righting wrongs, doing what I want to do.
You're talking about a virtual world, essentially.
Exactly.
Like a never-ending game.
I know it sounds crazy, but
it could be compelling if like you said, they had the right things in place, and it sounds like
you need to have a balance of, and I'll let you take the floor after this, but you need to have a balance of completely freeform content, but still tethered together with some direction.
Right.
And that's the other thing that, the Storybrick system was going to have. The idea was that the developers of EverQuest Next, or whatever game Storybricks was going to be a part of, would kind of act as dungeon masters.
Okay.
In that classic sense of the term. So if they wanted to, maneuver things in one direction or, move some things in another direction to fit their story, they could do that. And that would be an ongoing process, an ongoing relationship with the developers and the players. And that's something that I would really like to see in a video game. So I see games like Minecraft or something. Games that are literally infinite, games that have gameplay loops that are self-sustaining in a lot of ways.
Sure.
And I see that sort of game, and I love Minecraft, I do, but it's always left me wanting more. Like, what if you took a game with the size of Minecraft, with the complete freedom of Minecraft, made it a bit more, less blocky, and you added that sort of dynamic content on top of it, and you added that kind of developer input on top of it.
Interesting.
That would be the perfect game as far as I'm concerned.
See, and I'm going to give a counterpoint because that's just the way I am. My problem with certain sandbox games, and I'm going to use Fallout 4 as an example, is that length matters. And if there's enough content, what you're talking about is content that is always changing and is always going to be new, which is great. My problem is that we just talked in our last episode about repetition. And so I'm going to compare two games you might not think to compare, which is Borderlands 1 and Fallout 4, because essentially I had a very similar feeling playing both games, which with Fallout New Vegas, we've talked, your favorite game, there's a lot of different ways you can handle. It's a lot more about player choice than anything else, right? With Fallout 4, I felt like a lot of that player choice had just disappeared, and essentially you're just given tasks, go to this area, kill this bunch of creatures, come back, get a reward. Which was the same gameplay loop for Borderlands, but the difference was I put in about equal amounts of time into Borderlands 1 for 2 playthroughs, I think, as I did with Fallout 4, and I'm pretty much done with Fallout 4. I can't keep playing it because I'm like, I don't have any enjoyment. I don't have any excitement to play the game because I'm like, with Borderlands, like by that point, I mean, it took me, I think, maybe 30 hours to finish a full playthrough. So for 30 hours, that gameplay loop was great and sustainable. But with Fallout 4, I'm at 60 hours and I'm just like, man, it's just getting old, right?
But let me throw in a little wrench. Into what you said.
Please.
Okay. So what if there was player choice in this game? Real player choice.
You talking about your perfect game?
My little imaginary game. What if you could join those, what if you could, let's call it that for now. What if you could join those orcs?
Oh, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm saying like adding that level of player interactivity and player choice. What if you could join those orcs? What if you could help build up that little town? What if you could be a bandit helping the orcs take down those merchants and build a little society? And then what if you could go to war with that other city where the merchants were all going? And see, that's kind of the idea that I have. And it's crazy, but the thing is, like, all of these systems already exist. It's a matter of putting them together.
Sure. I think I'm starting to understand what you're saying. And my point to you, which is what I kind of already said, was player impact. I think in order for a game like that to be viable and to be fun all the time, player impact and player choice have to be the two key components. Like, you could choose to be a bad guy. You could choose to allow orcs to raid villages, or you can be, you're talking about a true like the ultimate RPG experience, which is kind of like what Dungeons and Dragons is a little bit, like a D&D, the game, but not literally like using the set rules from D&D. You're talking about an environment where you can do whatever you want within limitations, but you can do creative problem solving. It's not going to be A, B, or C. It's going to be like, option 1 to 1,000 for how you handle situations all over this virtual world you're talking about. And now, I mean, unless you want to jump in real quick, I was going to get to another thing that you would need to have in this Psycho Journey, your new game that's coming out. Traversal is key. That has killed experiences for open world and sandbox games for me.
I cannot stand getting around in Skyrim.
Yeah. Wow. When I played it for like the first 2 months, that was rough. I had to get from one area to another, and I remember like it was really difficult. There was a lot of high-level enemies, so I just jumped in the water. I think it was the Eastern Continent. I don't know the name of it because I only played the game for 2 months. But I swam for literally 30 minutes in the water just to avoid getting attacked by random like enemies, because it was in an enemy. I had to go through enemy territory to get to wherever I was going. I forget where it was.
So, the thing that killed Skyrim's traversal for me, what I first realized that just kind of stunned me. You can't do a sprinting jump in that game. Think about that. You can't get a running start and jump.
True.
Really let that sink in for a second.
Well, you can't climb ladders either.
In every other game that I can think of in the vein of Skyrim, you can go a little faster and then get some momentum and then jump.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I never understood how important that was until it was taken away from me. Like, let's say you're trying to be a quick, nimble character in Skyrim, which you can't, by the way, but let's say you're trying to, and you're trying to run through the forest really fast. Oh, there's a log in your way. In every other game imaginable, while you're sprinting, you could jump over that log and keep going. You know what happens in Skyrim? You press the jump button, nothing happens. You stop, you force yourself to stop sprinting, wait a full second, at which point you've probably bumped into the log, and then you jump over it. I know I'm nitpicking, but that shit pisses me off. On the topic of traversal in Skyrim, and this isn't just a problem with Skyrim, but any game where you can't climb something that you could logically climb, it makes me so angry. Like anytime there's a ledge that is right above me, just head length, but I can't jump over it because my character can barely jump. All I'm thinking is, why can't I just use my arms and climb up? But we're going off on a tangent, but your point is very valid that traversal is incredibly important.
That's more
in
like
open world games.
That's more like I can't think of the term, but yeah, I would still consider it traversal. I'm more talking about like open world traversal in terms of how you get from point A to point B, less about your character nimbleness, I guess, or character agility, or whatever the hell you want to call it.
Pure movement.
Yeah, okay, movement. That's what you're talking about, character movement. What I'm talking about with traversal is, okay, you take a game like, two games that I remember having a hard time with the traversal was GTA 4, because you would run into, I can do GTA 4, Assassin's Creed 3, and Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs, let's start with that. The car driving sections of that game were horrible. They were hot shit. And then add to that, there were police chase missions where search zones would randomly pop up while you're trying to drive around. So you're trying to look at the mini-map while you're driving. Terrible experience. GTA 4 was just kind of clunky. I didn't like it. Just felt like I could never really open up and have fun. Like from 4 to 5, I started driving in a 5. I'm like, this is fun. Like they tweaked it slightly from 4 to make it a lot more smooth and like what's the one character's name? He had like a drift ability or slow down time ability. And that was awesome. So they definitely fixed it.
I think it's also, and I'll let you finish, but I think it's also because Los Santos in GTA 5 was a lot more open.
Right.
And by that I mean like because New York is a very cramped city in general.
Sure.
But I mean, I don't want to blame that all on New York. I mean, they should have designed the game better, but I think that does kind of play into it. There's a lot less space to move around, there's a lot less room for error when everywhere is just either a really cramped alley a car can't go through or a giant skyscraper in your way.
Right. That's more my point, is it just was cumbersome to get around in that game. And then I'll give one more example of bad game design or bad traversal and then go for good. Assassin's Creed 3, I think I mentioned, GTA 4, Watch Dogs, and Assassin's Creed 3. 3 actually wasn't the climbing mechanics, it was the goddamn like random crowds that would form and start attacking British officers. I don't know if this was a glitch or not, but I would be running through the streets and then all of a sudden I would not have done anything. I'm like, I guess it was like your alert status would go up and they would start chasing me for no reason. Because usually what it was is there was like a crowd of revolutionaries fighting with the British. And then somehow, I don't know if it was a glitch, but somehow I would have like a wanted level. And I'm like, what the it would drive me nuts, because then you have to take 5 minutes, go find somewhere to hide, wait for the guards to leave. So that was annoying, and that's a little bit less of like the actual traversal and more just the gameplay mechanics.
But no, I understand what you're talking about, because it's really funny you brought that up. I was just playing Assassin's Creed 3 yesterday. I know that's like a totally random game to play, but if you saw the latest episode of Psychotrip, I'm kind of on like an American themed game kick right now, so I needed my fix.
Sure.
So I went back to Assassin's Creed 3, which, by the way, the atmosphere in those games are fucking breathtaking. Like, if nothing else, even in the Assassin's Creed games I don't like, I'll still come back to every now and then just to like walk through 1700s New York for a while.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I totally understand what you're talking about. It's not fun. And this is unique to Assassin's Creed 3, because I don't remember any other Assassin's Creed game that I've played being like this.
I don't think there was.
Whenever you're wanted, and you're right, I don't know if that was a glitch or not, what you were talking about, but whenever you're wanted, it's it seems way more cumbersome than it ever was in the other games. It's way harder to avoid guards.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an infinite stream of guards. Like you can't like fight off a crowd and then be safe for a while. They just keep coming at you. Meanwhile, you're trying to get from point A to point B, in the process of which you're just attracting more and more mobs towards you. It's just it comes back to traversal, like you were saying. It does come back to traversal and being able to enjoyably maneuver through the game world.
Exactly. And I want to provide a good example, and that would be Red Dead Redemption, which is pertinent because Rockstar just teased on their Twitter account that there's going to be a new Red Dead Redemption game.
I just came a little.
Yeah, and the reason I love Red Dead Redemption is because that game, the traversal was awesome. Yes. Okay. Like what happens when you go from point A to point B? You're looking at these breathtaking Western vistas, right? You are being immersed in the game, just looking at the glorious nature around you, right? And then you go into towns, and each town is kind of different, but it isn't cumbersome to get from point A to point B. It might take a little while, but you start to be familiar with like the little back routes, and you might stop and kill an animal or something to get their skin, or you might see there was like random like robberies and stuff that happen from time to time, or a woman on a horse like running away or something like that. I can't remember, but there are enough random events that happen that kind of break up the quote unquote monotony of just looking at these breathtaking vistas. And I had played GTA 4 before that, and then I played this game, and I was like, this is why I like this game better, because it doesn't feel cumbersome to get around. And in an open world sandbox game, traversal, movement, all of that is super critical, because you're going to be traveling a lot. You know what I mean? You're going to be going from point A to point B a whole bunch. So, like you said, not being able to jump in a sprint, that could be annoying, definitely. And that's more just movement in general, but it still counts as traversal, in my opinion.
And you brought up the little side activities in Red Dead Redemption, and that brings us back to our original point about, side activities versus filler content.
Okay.
And when you were saying that, I kind of had a little conundrum in my brain trying to figure out why those side activities were always so compelling for me, but in other games it's not. Like, if you were to compare it to, the slew of Radiant quests happening in Skyrim, in both cases, it's a handful of similar activities happening in kind of an impromptu fashion. And I think what separates it is that in Red Dead Redemption, it had just the right amount of handcraftedness to it. You know what I mean? And I think that's another really important thing for dynamic content in general in sandbox games. There needs to be the right level of handcraftedness to the situation, because if you just have an algorithm decide, okay, this random villagers will come to you and say, hey, fetch my insert item here at insert place here. That's not very compelling, and you see through it very quickly. But there's something about, even if there's less of the activities to do, there's something much more compelling about knowing a developer actually created specific scenarios that are all different and actually have a beginning, middle, and end that's coherent to them. And I feel like that's what Red Dead Redemption did. Like, and some of them, to mix things up even more, some of them would have different outcomes. Like, I remember one time where there's that woman who's saying, help me, or take me for a ride, I need to get back to town. Sometimes she's being totally genuine, and sometimes that becomes like a little quest for you to save this woman. Other times, she's secretly a bandit, and she's leading you into an ambush.
Steals your horse
or some shit. And it all comes back to that perfect balance that I'm trying to get at. That perfect balance that I thought would have been in games like EverQuest Next. That perfect balance that was in Red Dead Redemption, where the content was just developer-driven enough to ensure some quality control, I guess is what I'm saying. There was quality control in the random events that kept them fresh, that kept them engaging. And I feel like more games need to kind of embrace that sort of thing, that crossroads between linear gameplay and dynamic gameplay, to create something that in a lot of ways is infinite, but still feels original, still feels handcrafted and high quality every time. And it's much easier said than done, but that's definitely something that has to be done.
I completely agree. And I think that's a perfect way to end this episode.
Well, one more thing before we do. And I told you before we started this that I wanted you to think of your perfect sandbox RPG. I want to end this by tying this all together.
Sure.
So for me, my perfect sandbox game, tying together everything I said about an infinite open world, a game with a lot of dynamic content, it would probably be like you said, Psycho Journey as the working title of this game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because the game would be a journey. Okay, so what I was thinking was a game that's kind of like a journey to the West, kind of like a Pioneer Oregon Trail thing, right?
Okay.
But taking place in like a fantasy version of the United States. And I talked about that a bit in my latest episode, but I feel like tying it all together here. So it would be a very open-ended game. You're just dropped into the world, and your goal is head west. And you're given this massive world, and there's going to be little bits that are hand-picked story pieces. So every single time you play through the game, you're going to go through the same story beats, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in between that, the world will be somewhat randomly generated. So there'll be different things every time, different things to see every time. And it'll be, just like I said, that balance between not complete random generatedness, so that it's just random and makes no sense, but specific areas or set pieces or things that were handcrafted by somebody and put together to create a world that's different every time. And you would have that sort of dynamic, that dynamic content that you'd have from EverQuest Next. You'd have those side quests you have in Red Dead Redemption. And to tie it all together, it would be a very moddable game. And after you beat the standard game, you could then go back and literally just go through the settings, figure out, okay, how big do I want this world to be? I'm going to make a free form mode for this. How big do I want this world to be? How dangerous do I want the enemies to be? How much this or that would be in the game. And it would be possible to really mod this stuff together. There'd be a community of people, kind of like in an Elder Scrolls game, who mod this stuff, share this stuff, so that it's literally an endless experience of new content wrapped around in this game with, a somewhat set story and a set environment and setting and world, but it's always a different experience every time.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Right?
It's like the new Oregon Trail or what we call the Psycho Journey. But if I were, I can give you my ideal sandbox game. And I don't know why, but I've always thought that it'd be really fun to have a game that took like the Spider-Man 2 mechanics of like the swinging through New York City in a forested setting, right? So it'd be kind of like, think Kashyyyk from Star Wars, for any Star Wars fans, with the huge trees. And you kind of like, that's why I mentioned Attack on Titan earlier. I still haven't played the game or really looked up gameplay, but I've heard like I can't remember what the system is called, the system that they use to get through the trees. But I always thought it'd be really cool to have like kind of like a Tarzan-esque game where you're just moving really, really quickly. And I'm all about speed. I just want like a really, really fast RPG where it like the combat is very, very fast paced versus something that's a little bit more slow and traditional, like turn-based combat. I want a game where it's like, you are gripping the edge, you're gripping your controller the whole time you're fighting whatever enemy it is. And that's kind of like my basic premise for a game. Something where movement is like super critical, and it would probably be a lot of verticality in that movement too. So you'd have like tree settlements and bigger towns or something like that. I think it'd be really fun. So.
That actually sounds really cool. I'd definitely play that.
Yeah.
So I guess in closing, I mean, we've said pretty much all we can say at this point, but I guess in closing, what we're trying to say is if you're making a sandbox game, you need to really think about how you're going to keep that game going, how you're going to keep that game entertaining. You need to have several core aspects, in my opinion.
Sure.
You need to have an atmosphere and a world that's compelling.
Mm-hmm.
First off, because everything I described about my perfect game, everything you described about your perfect game, I feel like it's all contingent on, do people care about this world in some way?
Mm-hmm.
Do people care enough to discover more, to look for more, to keep going through in games that are very open-ended and don't necessarily have a set beginning, middle, and end. On top of that, you need to really look at how you do dynamic content. You need to find that balance between, pure randomness and handcrafted linear set experiences. And I feel like if you have those things, and yeah, you're on your way to making a game that at the very least the two of us want to play.
There you go.
So yeah, that was fun. I'm Trip.
And I'm GameLark.
And we will see you next time.